We help our clients generate reviews from their customers, generate more traffic, and increase their conversions. And my favorite food is Thai food. If I have to pick.
I am Melissa Plunkett-Gomez. I'm a sales executive with Allego. Allego is a mobile application that uses short video to allow sales teams to access, capture, and master relevant stories and best practices in the field as a just-in-time type of learning. And my favorite food is Italian.
Can we hear me? Yes, we can. My name is Lou Diamond. I am the CEO of Fobia. We're a sales coaching and consulting firm focused on making the best people like yourselves even better. And my favorite food, I'll expand upon the Italian, is pizza. Absolutely not. Like what kind of animal?
So good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Stefani. I'm the Vice President of Sales at ADP Total Source, which is a professional employer organization, or a PEO, as you may have heard it to be. Favorite food, I'm going to go with anything that swims. So I love seafood, so if it swims, there's a pretty good chance that I will eat it.
Nice, nice. My favorite food is anything that's spicy. I always forget this. So if you are into the social medias, the Twitters, the Instagrams, and so on, we are at enterprise_sale, and the hashtag for this evening is B2B sales. So without further ado, let's talk about this thing around sales training and sales coaching. And I think we can all agree that I think sales training and coaching is probably important. We're all here talking about it, so I just want to start off kind of as an icebreaker. What's the worst training experience you've ever experienced? We'll start off with Mike.
It's an easy one for me. It was my first training meeting I had as a sales exec, so as soon as I got into a leadership role. And the mistake I made was making the meeting about myself as opposed to the team. And as soon as it wrapped, I knew I made a major mistake. I learned from that point on, after reflecting a bit, that it's never about me. It's always about the team, and that's the way it's been from that point on. So, a giant mistake to begin my leadership career, which I was able to rectify rather quickly. So I was happy about the end result there.
It's a community thing. The worst training experience. I had Mark Birch in one of my workshops.
That's always.
I'd have to go back to when when the training is more about a process and to not go too Simon Sinek on you, but all about the what and how. And there is nothing about why you're doing what you're doing. The training will never succeed. And I can probably say over the years of, we all have to go through different types of training to get certified, to learn about a new technology product, or whatever it might be. But the worst ones were the ones that just focused on that and didn't focus on why it would be successful. So I can't pick one, but there have been many in that regard.
I've been with small early stage companies for probably the last 10 years, so I haven't done any major sales training in a large organization in a while, but I can remember when I was in a large organization just sitting in a room for 2 days, usually in some very nice location, looking out and being lectured to for straight for 2 days, maybe, for a few minutes doing some role play, but really ineffective. And just wanting to get to the bar or to the pool.
Bad role play. Never good.
So mine was probably about 4 years ago. I had just started working at a fintech company. I knew nothing about fintech or really M&A, which was the market that we served. My first day, I was the only person that started that day. They gave me a binder, not this thick, full of just like the M&A process, how everything worked. And they were pretty much like, all right, read this and then we'll see you tomorrow. If you don't finish, you'll spend the rest of your day tomorrow doing that. And then maybe by Thursday, you'll get on the phone and make some sales. And that was actually the training process in in its entirety.
Nice, sink or swim. So, I guess follow on that, we all had really bad training experiences, but what really differentiates ones that were really world-class for you? Things that you look back on and said, they had these characteristics. This is why it was a great training class.
I'll take that one. So I had the opportunity for my first sales job to be at Yelp, and I don't know if there's any Yelpers out here, but the training was honestly world-class stuff. Like, spend your first week in a classroom environment, it's really great. You get to know the people around you who are starting with you, and there's kind of like a camaraderie that you form with your group. And then they did a very good job of having an in-depth training on the industry itself, which we can talk more about later, but the industry itself, the product, and ultimately their sales process, which was quite simple. But I think it was super effective, and then the training didn't stop there, right? You actually had a long training program where it was more of a on-the-job coaching afterwards, and I think it was one of the things that made me a great sales rep.
So I always really enjoy hearing from peers stories, both success stories and failures. So the trainings that I've been to that have been most valuable for me are those where they may be talking about a concept or a product, whatever, but then having peers from the sales organization talk about how they applied what we're trying to learn, or how they've gone out and sold, and what's worked and what hasn't worked.
So for me, it would be, first and foremost, it's the content, right? It has to be relevant to whatever the situation might be. Additionally, whoever's hosting the training needs to have an engaged audience, right? So people have to participate and they have to draw that out of the audience. So I think a combination of solid content with an engaged audience, which is obviously stems from the person that's running the training, is pretty important. I think those three factors would that as well.
And maybe drilling in on that, ADP, from other panels that we've had, have recognized ADP as having a real world-class training organization, spending a lot of time getting sales reps up to speed and just having an entire process around it. Can you maybe delve into a little bit of what you do at ADP to make training unique?
So 17 years at ADP, I'd say the training has never ended. So it's the longest training that I've ever been involved in. But I think number one, it starts with the expectation, right, of our interview candidates and the new hires, right? So the expectation that we're not going to throw you in the ocean without a life raft, right?
So this really starts at the very beginning, even before onboarding.
Exactly. It's during the interview process. This is what our process looks like. Here's how we ramp our people up. This is the expectation that we're going to put in front of you, and that's what we're looking at, right? From there, it's culture, right? So we have a great culture of people within ADP, specifically to my group, leadership development program. So for those reps that are interested in getting into leadership, this is their mini team, so to speak, or a mentor-mentee type of capacity, which allows a new hire to not feel the pressure of a quota hanging over their head, understand that they have someone there that's going to help take them from point A to point B to point C, eventually all the way to point C, right? So it's important to have that from the onset, from the interview process, and then from the first day they start, right? This is your mentor, right? You're going to ride their coattails. They're going to show you what good looks like through our process until you feel comfortable. You start taking on more and more of a role within those calls until you really get it. And at that point, we find that our reps are better developed that way, as opposed to just throwing them out there for the quote over the head and say, go sell something. That's just a recipe for failure for us.
So you'd say you spend a pretty good amount of time actually with ongoing training.
Absolutely. Constantly. So we're training them on the product, we're training them on our process. From an EDP perspective, we are constantly being trained on our sales process or what the buyer's process is like now, and we have to react accordingly, right? So for us, and I think it's important, like, hey, you're not going to go to a doctor who's not up to speed on the latest treatment for a medical condition, or an accountant who's not up to speed on tax law. So when you're in front of somebody, you want to be the resident expert, so to speak. You want to be the go-to person, and we ramp them up that way. When they're ready to roll, they should be able to talk about the ball right away. And that's the expectation we set, and it's the culture we have today.
I'm going to go the opposite direction. And Jordan, you're at Yotpo. When we talked, it was a really interesting conversation because there was no sales training set up at Yotpo when you first started here in the U.S. What was that like? How did you set things up?
Well, so first I actually spent about a month just on the product, just understanding how the product works, who our buyer is, and what their day-to-day life is like at work.
And just to be clear, you were brought on specifically to do sales training. That's what you're hired in for.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, we would have not hired me, and we would have taken someone who would have been selling on the phones for a year and a half. We didn't have the opportunity to do that because we really hired our first sales reps in March or April. So in a not perfect world, what I did is I spent about a month working with the product, learning about our customers and the buyers and like what keeps them up at night and what's important to them, so that I could really understand. And then I took a deeper dive into our process and what's working with our salespeople, what's not. And essentially what I did is I built like an MVP, a minimum viable product for training. 1 week was focused on the product, and the next week was focused on sales, and there were certifications at both steps. And so what actually worked really well in that process was the first month commission for our new account executives is entirely based on training. Right? They have to pass their certifications. They have some other tasks around prospecting or depending on what role they're coming in for. So it really helps us to get their full attention. Let me tell you, when you tell them that their first month's commission is based on training, like they take it seriously. They're writing down everything, like they're writing down the color of the room, the crack on the wall. Like they want their money.
Yeah, that's a good point because what are some of the incentives to get people to buy into training other than saying that your manager's making you do training? Any thoughts on what are some of the incentives? What are the things that you've seen that have been effective to get people bought into the fact that you have to do training? Because particularly with some folks that have been selling for a long time, telling somebody you're going out to training sounds like, oh, you're taking me out the field. Why are you wasting my time? Any perspectives there?
There's this interesting thought that if you focused 2 days on the stuff that you needed to work on and train, it would actually make you 20 times more productive in the other 360 some odd days in a year. And people kind of lose perspective for a minute. If they're out of the flow, they won't do it. So the value of taking time out, getting out of your regular everyday flow and getting into something where you can learn something new, try something new, practice things that will make you better, that focused time out of the flow is going to make you incredibly more productive. And you have to keep doing it. Doing it 17 years of going through it, it doesn't ever end. As long as you continue to recognize that and appreciate the value of it within it. That's the most important piece, is get out of that. So incentives are to even, I've seen structures where people create, that training is not only part of your financial package or whatever it is. Some people get more incentive by the more training that they do in organizations that they have. If it's learning other products, if it's cross-selling and putting in that, and a great sales manager to make sure that they're pushing the envelope to make sure these people are actually doing as much of this training as they can, because they're going to be a more well-rounded, all-star salesperson.
Melissa, you've kind of seen both sides. So you've been at the big companies like a Deloitte. You've also been at the small scrappy startups at like a Crimson Hexagon, as you were there for a while, and then just seeing the ramp up. I mean, what's been your experience of seeing how training's been set up, and what did you find that kind of worked that got people engaged, wanting to do training?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I see even today there's a huge variety in terms of managers valuing training, right? And it all comes from the top. So if your manager doesn't value it, then the salespeople aren't going to value it. And I think what I see though across the board for every sales rep is sales reps are motivated to learn when they're in front of an opportunity. And so if you can provide training for them as a foundation, so event-based training, classes, curriculum, but provide them a way to access that knowledge or that type of training when they're out in the field and they understand the relevance of it. That's when they're most apt to absorb what they need. If they know they have to meet with a new stakeholder, a new executive, they're going to do whatever they can to find out who's done it in my organization, who's been successful, what are the key pain points.
And that's really interesting because it ties into a lot of what I read in a recent case study. This company did training, they did everything right. They set up all the technology, the tools, the process, but it failed. And they came back and said it failed because the one thing that they didn't do is have managers do these bi-weekly calls where they actually went to reps to enforce a lot of training. And have you seen where some of the training just falls off and because the coaching just isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's from the accountability aspect of it, right? So it will fall off if it's not consistently messaged to your people. I mean, it'll go in one ear and out the other. So it's reinforcing it, and it's by training in this type of setting, or it's training in the field, right? It's the coaching sessions you have when you're delivering feedback to one of your reps. It's running a call properly and running a good analysis and a good diagnostic on the group, and then showing them what good looks like. That it all comes into play with regards to the training and development of any
Any other comments, just in terms of keeping up the excitement around training and getting people engaged well beyond just the training room or the sales conference?
Yeah, I think for us, it does also start in the interview process, which is, it's like we pitch training as a perk, right? You come here and you're more likely to succeed at Yotpo because we invest so much in your training. And I think if you hire the right people, they'll be really excited to learn. And like, to give you an example, something that we're doing this week on Friday, we have one of our customers, one of our bigger customers, the head of marketing for that company, is coming into our office to do a talk on his job. And kind of like what we talked about before, the kind of things that he does on a day-to-day basis and what keeps him up at night and where his focus is. So again, it keeps them really interested. They get to learn about something new. They get to learn about a customer, a success story. And like I said, everyone wants to learn something new. And that's an advantage for us.
I really like that, bringing in customers or bringing in outside perspectives to make it new, to make it fresh. And also just want to hone in on that question just about the onboarding process and the hiring process. Just a show of hands, by the way. How many folks are at companies where their onboarding process, their sales training process has been a week or less? How about 2 weeks or less? Or 1 or 2 weeks? How about anyone had like a full month of sales training when they just started out? Definitely a lot of the folks that are in the training field or from ADP. And I think that actually says a lot that there has to be an investment in time. Would you agree? I mean, what have you seen kind of on average from different sales experiences? How long has some of those training things been for folks?
From other organizations, well, maybe I've been at ADP for quite a while. I mean, it wouldn't be the right person.
But I wanted to ask Louis specifically. So you've seen a lot from the outside training perspective.
I'd say that you'll be lucky enough if you can get more than a week within a year within the company to actually make that investment. I think there's something to be said about what the budgets are and the investment in product. And obviously technology companies will tend to have more budget, and there's many people here who run entrepreneurial startups and they're training themselves every day on the job. So, but if you're able to get a week from a training firm within a year, that's pretty good. What's probably needed is probably a month. And if you think about what that is, but that's really hard to do cost-wise in many organizations, but I'm with you. It's a necessity.
And so, or Melissa, Jordan, I mean, what have been some of your perspectives? So you get kind of the crunch training session to kind of go out, get as much information as possible, and be as productive as you can with the sales teams in the short term. So you probably have to do a lot just from a coaching perspective. What are you doing around the coaching element?
Yeah, so the first 2 weeks is like crunch time. Otherwise, that training never stops for us, right? We do weekly trainings, we go over calls, we think about what people could have done better. And we have their colleagues critique them. And that's something that we do every week, sometimes multiple times a week.
You actually do like peer critiques within the team.
Yeah, we call them recaps.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one thing Mike said is it's all about reinforcement. So whether the training is a week or 2 weeks a month, you know, research shows that 2 months after you take a training, you've lost 60 to 70% of what you've learned if there's no reinforcement. So doing kind of ongoing team meetings to look at different case studies, to critique each other, to see what good looks like, to talk about best practices is critical.
Yeah, actually, Lou, I wanted to ask you about, because you offered up a few slides that actually talk about the saliency and just the stickiness of training and what's actually taught and how it continues through, basically how it continues through time.
I'll steal some of Mike's line here, that if training shows you what good looks like, coaching shows you what great looks like. And I can't see the slides over here, but I think this shows what...
This is without coaching.
Yeah, so this is a world without coaching, and this is what you all are mostly familiar with, where you basically go to a training, you get a couple of great nuggets, you've had a great bonding experience, you're all excited, you're all revved up, and you get out there, and maybe you have to do something new, so it changes the way you do something. I don't know if anyone's ever played golf before, but it's like going to get a golf lesson, and then they totally redo your swing, and you're horrible initially, but then you start getting better. But if you don't continue to monitor yourself, and you don't continue to have ongoing coaching and ongoing development to reinforce what you learned in training, you'll fail. It'll drop off, and you'll have to go kind of back to the beginning. And there's actually been some studies that think this chart doesn't even do real justice because it actually dips down lower to where you might have even started. And then by the time it re-meets, maybe it's that annual training you go to again, and you'll be like, oh, great, here we are again at that one-year meeting. What are we going to do differently this year? Now, if you see the next slide here, if you have constant coaching from either your mentor, from an outside coach, from a coaching process that constantly is working with some of your best leaders, what you took in training, you're only going to be able to grow from because you'll set the base higher, and now you'll be able to work on the skill sets of the individual person to figure out what it is. Because whether it's Mike, Melissa, myself, Jordan, what we do as salespeople is one thing. But when you coach somebody, you're going to focus on what we do to make ourselves great. Each one of us has our own way of working, and a coach will help develop that and make that even bigger.
It's unusual, though, in my experience, companies, managers don't have time to coach. And what I hear is, you know, I'm able to get out to do ride-alongs or to do coaching with my salespeople maybe once a quarter if I'm lucky. And so the ability to coach is critical, but you know, there's so many other priorities that always seem to.
So just like any thoughts on how to maybe balance it out? Because a lot of onus on coaching falls on the manager. Like, how do you help them? How do you help the managers to be great coaches for the sales team and vice versa? How do reps get the coaching that they need on an ongoing basis?
You know, it's funny that usually the way coaching works is where the dollars are allocated is they'll take the senior most person who's really the leader, and this does work, by the way, because if you coach someone who's been doing this for a very long time, they've already seen greatness, and now it's to get them at that other level. But more importantly, if you coach that individual, they will start to lead their teams as coach-like, in a way that is enforcing a coaching culture all the way down the line. And as more junior people are getting more developed over time, and now they can start getting to levels where they can be coached, they would have already had kind of the coaching culture within it. So it's seeping down, and there's different ways to do it. And to Melissa's point, it is hard to find the time to allocate to go do it, but it's vitally crucial. And I think we're in a good spot right now because coaching was a word that never was involved, and we had a discussion beforehand. You know, some of the biggest mistakes of coaching is they plop it into the HR function, and it becomes an HR-related coaching component.
Right, that seems to be where sales training goes to die. And that's not me. If anyone's in HR, don't shoot me. But to me, I feel that if you're going to do something specifically for salespeople and sales effectiveness, I almost feel that it needs to be in the sales function.
It's funny, we were talking about this, and we were as salespeople, we were saying when we're working on an opportunity and all of a sudden HR comes in, then you know that things are slowed down. It's just not that having it rooted in sales roots it more in the results and performance rather than in the process, and it creates a higher sense of urgency to make it happen and make it a priority. And salespeople will not value it if they don't see it coming from their sales executive.
That's a good point. I mean, George, as an example, who's your boss at Yotpo?
He's that guy sitting right there.
Oh, wait. Hey, hi, Tom. Thanks for coming out. But I think it is important that it has to come from the top. It has to be, not even the head of sales, it has to be, I believe, just a corporate initiative to say, yeah, we're going to actually invest in training. Because otherwise, they wouldn't hire someone like Jordan to actually come in, and they probably could just throw bodies at selling, to actually invest in saying, oh, we need the process. Part of the other thing about this is, I don't know if a whole lot of organizations are really doing a lot around measuring the success of training. What are you doing at Yotpo is just to measure things. What are some of the tools, what are some of the things that you're looking at on a week or monthly basis to say, yeah, training seems to work, or we can improve it this way?
So I think that one of the things that we do, and we're trying to actually do more of it, because we are such a young company, is we look at places where our reps are deficient. So in the sales pipeline, let's say, for example, their close rates are lower, or let's say their discovery call to demo conversion rate is lower, or even if it's on the cold call, wherever that is, we'll figure that out and we'll dismantle what they're doing and try to coach them to do better at that, and then we'll see if it rises, because it's a pretty good indicator.
So you're diving really deep into your sales analytics, into your pipeline, to say, okay, well, here's some things that we can work on as a team as well as individually. To say, let's do some coaching, or if it's broad enough, maybe break it out into like a working lunch session, or something where you can bring in someone to actually speak to a particular topic. Any thoughts on what, like ADP?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's a much larger organization, so we have a lot more obviously capital to spend on training. But our new hires, they are all grouped together. So each new hire class, let's call it, they are grouped together and they have weekly meetings with the sales strategist, which basically they provide their information to all the metrics that we track, right? We stack rank them and make it a little bit competitive. If they close business within the first 90 days, that's like a big win for them. Like our expectation is a deal in the first 90 days. So it's really having that consistent meeting every week where we have that scoreboard, right? And it's at the visibility of, okay, competitive sales environment should have a visible scoreboard because nobody wants to be on top, right? So we have that on a weekly basis with our sales strategists. That gives them an opportunity to be coached, develop, see how they compete against their peers, and that's on top of the traditional coaching that we're doing. Two points that were made earlier. It's finding the time to do it, right, and finding champions or leaders to message what you're trying to accomplish. So that's kind of how we do it.
I want to dive into some specific actual training methodologies. What are some tools that you're using today, or some methods that seem to work and things that don't necessarily seem to work? And specifically, I want to talk about role play in sales. Does role playing really effective?
I'll start. So I think in the early stages, let's say like the first few weeks, it is effective because you want to even though it's very like scripted, it's exactly scripted, and it doesn't feel real. It gets them used to saying those words and gets them very comfortable with the pitch. So in the early stages, I would say it's pretty effective. But what's more effective than role plays is actually breaking down call recordings that breaking down reps' call recordings and pointing them, because first of all, when you hear yourself talk, you start to notice.
And just to pause there, so you're recording the calls?
You're recording all the calls.
Okay.
Yes. And going over them on certain areas and again, coaching them there and then seeing how they're improving. I think that's the most effective way.
Yeah, Lou, we had some role play at the Fobia.
So this will be fun. We get to make fun of Mark. Mark actually attended one of our Fobia workshops, and Fobia is an acronym. It's the fear of being immediately authentic. And we help push people through fear and get them into something that's holding them back. Now, as you can imagine, Mark is very shy. He doesn't like to talk to people. He doesn't like speaking in front of large audiences. Look at him now. Look how great he's become. No, but there were people in the workshop, though, that when they actually get up in front and they speak, they don't realize, to the point that Jordan made, which is that you don't know what you sound like, and sometimes you speak 100 miles an hour, or you might say the word I instead of we over and over again. You might not recognize that you're not actually listening to your client, you're just talking. You mentioned something earlier about the worst training you ever had was when someone was just telling you what to do. What we preach in our whole methodology is you're asking people what to do, whether it's your client or your coach or whatever it is. You ask them from that space, because it's a much more powerful position when you ask somebody and you empower them. So we do role playing, and we'll actually walk through a real life situation of what you're going to sell the next day. And we'll get feedback from the other members as well as the participants. And what we find is that it's a great dry rehearsal to try the things that you might not normally do. And then when you go do it and get into a lot of hypercritical things, you might start to think about it, but maybe more notably, you'll focus more importantly on listening to your client and how to go through it. And that's what you do. Because now look how big you are.
Yeah, I have no fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
No fear.
I've seen, as salespeople, I think we too often practice in front of our customers rather than practicing before you get in front of your customers. And what I've seen be very powerful is the more you practice, as you said, you talked about the golf swing, right? A golfer doesn't take a class and then all of a sudden go to play a tournament. The more you practice, the more those basic facts become part of muscle memory. And then when you're in front of a customer and you're dealing with a dialogue or an objection or discussion about something that wasn't part of your standard pitch, you're much more effective at responding to that and to listening and picking up on cues, because all of kind of the facts and the product information is part of your muscle memory. And so I think that the ability to practice and receive coaching on a consistent basis, not on a monthly basis, but on a consistent basis is really powerful, but it takes discipline and it takes time and it takes an investment. And so I think that's what really sets world-class sales organizations apart.
Just have one more thing to add, and when you really have a great relationship with the client, when it's become more than just a sale and now you're managing client success or whatever title you've come up with now that you're managing the relationship, get your client to coach you and ask them what you thought about it, what you hear. You heard about this new product that we're offering, or this new service line. How did it sound to you? How did I sound to this? Just literally asking them, because you're starting to appreciate their value, and they'll actually say, wow, he's actually asking me my advice. And even hearing, I will never spend money on that, or you were horrible. Usually those things don't happen. Usually you get some, no, it's interesting, but I've got some other suggestions, and then you can take that back for the next time that you do it to another person.
It's amazing that tribal knowledge can actually be really helpful. We do a really bad job capturing on a regular basis. And I do want to get back to that idea of tribal knowledge and collecting information, because there's some really interesting technologies and processing around that. I also want to dive in a little bit, Mike, when you're going to talk about some of the tools that you're using at ADP, like role plays, or things that you're doing that are interesting that you think are valuable.
Yeah, so role plays, as mentioned, it's scripted, it's unnatural, it's uncomfortable to a degree. It's interesting when you have a very tenured rep and who can sit in front of a hedge fund that manages $10 billion like it's nothing, and then when you do a role play, it's like they've never.
Well, it just feels really uncomfortable in front of your peers, right? So you either you almost play to the crowd.
Yeah, but it is important, and some of the tools we use, like there are tons of data that we look at. metrics. How do we get from our first call to the next step in our call analysis, or from analysis to proposal? And we look at these numbers obsessively, I guess, as far as I'm concerned. And when we see the gaps in a process, it typically becomes, okay, where is the area of opportunity? How do we fix this? I think by looking at those numbers, then role playing, or having enough experience to say, okay, I think this is what you're missing, and delivering that feedback, you can see an immediate ROI if the ratio is that increase. And that's typically what we go for. We're constantly looking at, I'm constantly looking at those numbers, and I know for doing it so long, right off the bat, if I see a gap in going from point A to point B, I kind of narrow it down to a couple of things that's probably broken in the process. And our job there is to go out in the field, coach, deliver feedback, repeat. So that's kind of what I look at. Look at the numbers, find the gap, find the problem, fix it, move on to the next.
Now, a lot of things around, particularly the past few years, we have a lot of tools around. A lot of these tools are focused on sales enablement, effectiveness. Have you used anything that's been really interesting from a training perspective? Do you think this has been really invaluable, not just from a training perspective, but having that ongoing coaching conversation with reps?
Just to add a little more, so we actually have trend reports that, like report cards for our reps, right? So we can sit down with the rep and go through those numbers with them, so that's a great tool for self-evaluation purposes, also for coaching sessions. So having that data at their fingertips, we can help close gaps quickly. They can see it on a regular basis and see where they are improving or where they are improving.
And just out of curiosity, do any of your organizations that you work with now or in the past, do you have like a playbook, like a sales playbook that you hand out? Do you quiz folks on it? How important is that actual playbook in terms of having that conversation, having an ongoing conversation with reps?
We use our own tool.
Oh no! You use your own tool? What are
We
you talking
use
about?
our own product, which is built for it. But we, what we do is, and what our clients do is, they have, first before doing any type of coaching, they can access a variety of short videos to see what good does look like. So rather than having just a few reps they can go to, they can access, some of the top reps and see not only here's the content I have to provide, but here's how someone presents it the way it's supposed to be presented. And then privately they can practice using their mobile device, and you don't have to share it with anybody, you can just practice and look at it yourself. Then when you're comfortable, you share it with a manager or a coach or a peer who can then provide coaching and feedback. So that's what we do internally as well.
Well, what's the name of this wonderful technology?
Allego, Latin root for allegory, to tell a story that has a point.
Jordan, so when you set up your training at Yotpo, what are any sort of tools or things that you use?
So yeah, actually, one of the first things I did was buy a tool, which I won't name because I'm already pretty unhappy with it. But no one on this pen. It's not your tool. So I think for us, what we've been looking at is, we've been looking at a number of things, but it all comes back to us and kind of what we talked about for tracking, right? How can we tie everything back to their performance, to how they did on the exams, and how they're improving? Because it's really one of the most important things to track for the
So,
rest.
well, you said exams. So how are you pushing out exams, and what does that actual consist of?
Right now it's manual, which means I don't sleep very much.
Yeah, probably a lot of just in the early startup days where a lot of it is manual. And there are these things called learning management systems, but they're massively expensive and very really require an entire team to set up. I was always thinking are there things that can be really quick hits, like these email tools, like a Yesware or a Talent app, or things that you may have used that have kind of helped alleviate some of the manual stuff that we do in terms of delivering content, or maybe managing conversations or doing coaching. Anything that comes to mind?
We have, quite frankly, I don't use it, but we have in my space, but it seems to go over well nationally. It's a guided selling app, right? So it's an app for sales reps to basically take them through the process with regards to probing questions and industry-specific data to kind of take someone through the process. It's worked pretty well outside of my space, quite frankly. It's just not something that we have adopted in New York City. I like to say we're a little bit different than the rest of the country with regards to our process, but that is available to us. We're in the process right now, actually, something we will use. I'm part of the team that's developing it, more of a human capital management assessment of the business, right? So it is, the way I envision it's not quite there yet. We're still in the process of creating it. But what this would entail would basically allow a rep to run a quality analysis call, which is really a deep dive into the challenges of the business, in a drop-down type format of every area of the business and questions that you'd like to cover. Like, for example, your onboarding process. Okay, there's 20 different questions regarding onboarding. I'm going to use these four. For company culture, okay, here's 10 questions. I'm going to use these 3. So you go through every stage of the business, and what I want it to look like is a report that's then, or a document that's actually printed out, company logo and letter, name on it, to do a deep dive in the business, to give the DMs, our district managers, the reps, more structure on their calls, to stay on point with specific topics, because the prospects can kind of take you anywhere, right? Stay on point, give them a sort of guide. So similar to what we're not using, I'm going to kind of reinvent it on New York way, and that should be out shortly. So going against the grain.
The New York office is always like going against the grain. It's something in the water here.
I've never met a salesperson who enjoys their LMS system.
Yeah, what is LMS?
Learning management system.
Yeah, I think that's a general case for like every company that's using them. But yeah, the other thing is that part of it's tools, but also part of it's expertise. Have you brought in people from the outside, training organizations, methodology organizations? Yeah. And what have been your thoughts, and how do you evaluate some of these organizations? Because there's a lot of folks in sales training out there for business.
I'll wait for the other side.
Yeah, are you bringing anyone in?
So we haven't, and Lou, I'm sure you're great, but we haven't because
It's early.
yeah, one, it's early for us, but the other piece that I think I've traditionally found with a lot of sales training that's been outside in past companies is that you really need to take time to know the buyer and know the company and know the product, and most sales training organizations don't. They give you their methodology and they teach it, and it always feels like something you can kind of read the book and then teach it to your own organization yourself, not to sound arrogant, but it always feels like they're not doers. They're just giving you their philosophy and their methodology, and they're kind of taking a step back.
Melissa or Mike?
You know, I've loved working in small, early stage companies for the last 10 years, and when people start to talk about sales methodologies and processes, I start to get really nervous. And
Yeah, I think we general just break down highs is a symptom of that. But
so, I mean, I think that there's probably a great opportunity for it, but my companies have always been so small. So.
We used to do a lot. We used to outsource training a lot more. Most recently, it's more on us to do the training, so we will have a trainer, so we can train first and we're going to deliver it, but maybe once in a while we'll have someone from outside of the recent power messaging training that we had, and was hosted by outside of the ADP. For the most part, it is train the trainer, we get the content, we get the material first, we get everything, we get the understanding of it, and we're going to deliver it. How it works.
I mean, I would just say that there's 3 buckets. There's training for the sense of learning what the product is, what your sales force needs to do. Then there's training methodologies, all these different things you hear out there, and everybody's got the latest and fastest way to slice your bread. And there are many good nuggets within all that, and there's lots of different ways that work. As someone who's been through a lot of these sales training, I love this stuff. But where we take it to the next level, once you've gotten the how and what you need to do, what coaching becomes and what sales coaching there is afterwards, is after you've gotten the process, Now we focus on the individual. No one's going to be a better salesperson. No one is going to sell like Mark or like Mike. They have their own unique ways to do it, and that's the difference. Coaching helps bring that out from them. Every training and baseline will be there. That's the difference of that, showing you what good looks like and showing you what great looks like. Everyone in this room here has got their own potential, their own unique way, and once they're authentic in how they do it, that's the sales coaching, and that's that third piece. That's where we sit.
I'm going to ask one last question and open it up to our audience to ask questions. But obviously, a lot of folks here this evening, smaller companies may not necessarily have a lot of resources, so it's difficult at the early stages for some companies to really have a more formalized program around training and coaching. So, are there any sort of resources that you found that kind of help sales leaders, managers, and even reps, just to get started, start thinking about it, or at least to get on base one to begin with? And also, I'll give this up to Jordan, because you've been here.
Yeah, so I would say less so for reps, but more so for a first sales manager or first sales director or VP is the Sales Acceleration Formula. It's a book by Mark Roberge, who's the CRO of HubSpot. I think it really helps you understand how to think about your organization quantitatively and how to build infrastructure early to grow a successful sales team.
And that's Sales Acceleration by Mark Roberge, right?
For us, we were on a Challenger sale. That's popular. That's kind of what we're focused on. So we did the training on it. Train the trainer, and that's kind of what we've been coaching our DMs, the district managers, how to sell in the field. But for limited capacity, it's, again, I go back to making the time for it because it is important to empower your people and to keep them engaged, and training is a big part of it. So I wouldn't lose sight of that with regards to any size business, specifically on the smaller startup type businesses. It is important. You've got to make the time for it, and then you have to empower your people to message for you, right? There's always going to be champions within the office, like I mentioned earlier, leadership development program. We have reps that are interested in getting into leadership. We're going to empower them to take on a mentee and to act as a leader would and deal with the challenges that come about. And they're going to be in the role at one point, right? So we'll start with one rep under you and see how you like dealing with putting out fires. So I find the time for it and make sure it's impactful.
I want to open up to any questions that folks have in the audience about training, coaching. Yeah, please.
So the issue I got a sales team on coaching. I got a couple of these young guys coming in to do sales development rep, right? And they want me to blow sunshine up their butt every time they remember to tie their shoes in the morning. And it's driving me nuts. So like, how do you handle a situation like that?
What? From a recognition perspective, is that what?
Yeah, like every time they remember to breathe in and then they breathe back out again, they think they should get recognized.
Yeah, I don't think that's on the leaderboard.
I think recognition is important. It sounds like what they're looking for is overkill, but different generation, right? Millennial generation, right? Everybody gets a trophy. That's what they're looking for. So that is something that everybody has to deal with now. And I think we're going to see more and more of it. It's just a matter of balancing it where it's not overkill, but you want to make sure you recognize people for doing a little bit more than exhaling during the course of the day. So there's got to be some type of balance in there.
Or maybe just add to it. Communicate to them what you want to hear from them, and what you want to hear, what the problems are, and what you don't want to hear. So if you give that kind of message to them, you set the guidelines for it, they'll work with whatever structure you feel works for you. And no one's blowing sunshine anymore.
Vanessa, you had a great question last time.
Oh, but that's no pressure.
So now there's so much pressure now.
So in terms of using an LMS, because you guys all, I think I saw across the board, and common knowledge is that salespeople don't like using the LMS, but as someone who is responsible for training our sales team through an LMS to some degree, if you could, and that's fine, I mean, it's a reality of the situation, but what would you like to see then? What would you have preferred to see through an LMS, or what would have made it an effective tool to deliver at least a part of the training? Because I understand the need for personal interaction and the need for coaching and feedback one-on-one, but in terms of scaling a program so that you can be an ADP, what would you have liked to have seen?
I think it's my experience, and it's mainly the companies I work with, or long time ago experiences, that LMS for foundational knowledge is great, going through a curriculum, certification, kind of taking those courses. The problem is that it's so rigid and structured that when you're out in the field, it's difficult to gain access to what you need for specific opportunity or specific meeting, or, to kind of fit the knowledge with the context and apply it based on relevance. And so it's a little bit more difficult with an LMS, just from what I've heard in my experience, because of kind of the structured approach. Although the foundation is important, but going out into the field and kind of having that access to that when you're out there.
Yeah, I would add to that point, a lot of these systems are really great at setting up a foundation, but there's not much that's very real-time about them. And the thing about sales is that it's a very real-time environment. You're hearing interactions all the time. You want to be able to coach in real time as well. So there's some tools I've seen, obviously Allego is one of them, Exact Vision is another interesting one, where it's about the real-time coaching in the moment. And that's actually what adds a lot of value, a lot of tribal knowledge that doesn't necessarily get captured, or maybe only gets captured in bits and pieces, or is delivered at the sales conference once a year. Laura?
I was just wondering, I think it's probably very valuable to record calls. I was just wondering, do you let the clients know that you're recording them? Like, how does that work?
That's an interesting question. We don't currently. I don't even, just to be honest, I don't even know the legality around that.
I can speak a little too. I worked in financial services for a very long time, and every single sales call, trade, or anything was all recorded. And we would always let the clients know. But you can also, hear beep in the background every 2 seconds while you're talking, so people would know it. So the legalities of it it's really more to protect, not to hurt the client, but it's more to protect their organizations and make sure things are there. And you can say it's a training tool, and if clients have an issue with it, I do know that there's functions where they cannot record it. And so
Any other questions? I think there's a few hands up.
Yeah, so this question is mainly for Jordan. So I'm kind of in a similar position that you were in, where I've been brought on to build a sales team and a training program with it. And you mentioned that you spent a month learning about the product and about the customer, and then developed what seems like a 2-week training program. So that means it's at least a month and a half before you guys can actually start selling. So how did you balance doing it right with just needing to get salespeople to start making sales?
So for us, we had a small sales team in place already. We had 3 account executives. So we're in a slightly unique situation where we're headquartered in Tel Aviv, in Israel. So I spent a month out there with the product team, building mostly there, the first few weeks, just the product side of training. And then also spent a lot of time with the marketing team understanding our buyer. Then as I came back, that's when I started on the sales training side, hearing what reps are saying, what's going on. So there was no formal sales training. It was kind of a little bit of a sink or swim environment for our existing previous A's, and I just learned by seeing what they were doing. Hope that helps you.
Take one last question. Brian?
We've got a slightly different situation as we got an opportunity to go in and have our product sold by an existing sales force who knows our market, but obviously doesn't know the product. Somebody earlier said that you should have a month, you probably get a week. I think we'll be lucky to get half a day. Is there any way to prioritize, in your experience, what those people should know to sell our product as efficiently as possible?
So training the partner reseller?
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's slightly more than that, but in effect, yes.
First thing I would ask for is more than half a day. One of the key things that you need is, you remember when you had to go way back in high school and grammar, you had to write like an intro, a body, and a conclusion? Every basic core sales piece should be on that call of what they need to have, what they must do, and how they can close it. There's 3 buckets of it. And when you're training other people to do that, that's what when you need to get it down to the fastest piece, because that's how you communicate the bare essence, the bones of what you need to go through there. What ends up happening in the training session usually is, okay, well, what about this feature? And you start digging a little deeper. But you have to kind of lay out the rudimentary bone structure, the outline of your sale, and what the pieces are first.
So you think the actual product is less important than the structure?
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the product is obviously important, you gotta know what it does, but ultimately it's about, the process has to be, well, how are you selling it today? What are the questions that you're asking? What are the things that you're listening for during every stage in a prospecting call, in a call, the set of a meeting, during a demonstration, all the way through the entire sales process? No other organization has a sales process better than you do. And you need to be able to wrap all that up into a playbook and also play that scenario out in some of those first calls. So it may not necessarily be a formal training, but you're going to be in the field, and I'd highly recommend essentially doing sales side by side, at least for some of those first initial deals, if it's possible. If not, it's going to be really difficult for your partner and thus yourself to be successful.
Thank you.
One last question.
Sure. Could the panel just share your mix of best practices in terms of ongoing training and coaching? Number one, top 2 tools that you use, like call recording tools or, Salesforce plugins, and then like the format that you use. Do you coaching and feedback one-on-ones, real time, or in groups on a weekly, monthly, whatever?
I'll start this one off. So for us, it is, yes, it's a one-on-one. So every Monday, we have an office-wide meeting, basically State of the Union, anything we have to roll out. And then from there, it's one-on-one. Pretty much our entire day Monday is spent doing one-on-one. So that's reviewing pipeline, reviewing sales process, deal strat, anything. We use the trend report, as I mentioned earlier, so with the metrics that we're coaching to, we'll use that as a talking point for our one-on-one meetings. Okay, you're going from your executive overview, which is our first call, to a proposal at a 30 or 40% clip, but you're going from proposal to close at a 10% clip, right? So then it becomes that deep dive into what is the messaging like? Why are you getting from point A to point B very quickly, but you're not closing business? So is it what you're saying up front that's getting you to that point, but your delivery is off? So that's when we start analyzing some of that. We use Salesforce to manage a lot of the pipeline and go through that. But then on every team has a different day. Those are an individual team meeting where there's more of that coaching session, more of that team environment. It's, 5 or 6 people per team and a leader. There's more of that team building. They'll do deal strat amongst that meeting, like, okay, well, I have a stalled deal. Here's what I did so far, and let's discuss it amongst the group and get some feedback on what I might have missed. So that's a time where I really think the training is more impactful on that smaller setting rather than the large scale. I wouldn't always felt that way. I think it's more intimate. I think you have more engagement there in a small 5, 6 employee TM group. So that's kind of how we do it. One-on-ones, large meeting on Monday, and then individual team meetings once during the week to kind of really focus on the gaps that we have on the team.
In the spirit of, everyone's going to be different, it depends. But when it comes to the coaching frequency, after you've had some kind of training or workshop, it's very important to have a lot of feedback and coaching sessions one-on-one or in smaller groups of that size, pretty close to when that workshop was. If the workshop was on a Monday, Tuesday, you would try to meet maybe that next week and kind of do it for a couple of weeks. Then take a break and then come back after a certain amount of time has passed to kind of let everything kind of fodder, see how it goes, see if people, how they're producing, if they're selling more, if they're getting into it.
and then try to come up with whatever the frequency of the organization is to coach the people. For some individuals, it might be weekly. For some, it might be, I just got to touch base once a month. There's people, I've got clients that I meet with once a month. I've got ones that literally can't stop calling me. But the key is to keep a frequency that works for them, but also gets results, and that you can track and really go to it. So it's not a fixed formula for everyone. Getting away from the tactical pieces Michael was talking about, a lot of it is going to depend on that individual person that you're coaching on your team. Each one's going to have their own needs, and that's what will make them successful.
So I'll talk about what I see with my clients. When they use Allego, is some of the things that I've seen work really well is they will often have some type of product launch training, and then follow up, as you said, with kind of a cadence of weekly, for lack of a better term, assignments, where they need to go practice, and then they'll receive coaching and feedback, and that'll be iterated maybe 3 or 4 times. Out of that, as a nice recognition, out of that, a lot of times you'll get some best practices where people who have been practicing and received coaching now are the ones to show what good looks like, so you can promote those. Also, I've seen kind of these bracket competitions work really well because salespeople are incredibly competitive. So if you have a new messaging or new product launch, setting things up where people on teams are practicing and receiving coaching, and then kind of going up through the bracket and having a winner.
So from a tool standpoint for call recordings, you asked, one is like, we use pretty simple join.me. It's like a screen sharing software. If you get the enterprise version, it can record your demos, and it serves as a conference line as well. And then we also use ShoreTel for our phone system, which has recording capabilities. For training and coaching, I think it's a mix of all the things that you talked about. One thing that I think is always great when a rep who's doing something really well on their own decides to create their own training and teach everyone else about what they're doing. And obviously that's a group session. Aside from that, you talked about real-time training, which maybe what you mean in that regard is like someone's on the phone and someone else is listening and trying to feed them what to say. I don't know how I feel about that sometimes. I think it can be helpful. I think also they're trying to listen on both ends, and it can really confuse them, and it can actually make them perform worse depending on the rep. I think the best way is you have your sales managers listening in on the calls and afterwards giving them feedback immediately and not too much feedback, just enough, right? The big points, the big things that they could have done better, because you don't want to overwhelm people.
All right, let's give it up, a round of applause.